It's a positive change for society. And I think it's one of those code changes. It wasn't done because of a tragedy or a fire. It was a proactive thing. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen NFPA and I've seen ICC, I think doing more changes like that, being more proactive to make adjustments to what society wants rather than, oh, now we had this fire, we had this earthquake, we have to go make a change, right? So I think the code organizations are much better. And that
Well, Robert, thank you for coming on the Fire Code Tech podcast. We're happy to have you today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Awesome. So, how I usually get these things started to give the listeners some context and also for my own listening pleasure is usually asking about how you found fire and life safety, how you found the field.
Where I grew up in a rural area in Western Pennsylvania. And I think I was maybe like a lot of little kids, right? The fire trucks, periodically going by would, there's some level of excitement, or you'd go to the annual fire department carnival in the local towns or whatever that were run by the fire departments. And I kind of got an interest, I think, from that, childhood piece or kind of experience. When I was 15, I actually learned about the small town that I lived near. They actually had a junior volunteer fire department program. And I found out about that, and I joined that literally when I was 15 years old. So at 15, right, you can like wash equipment and fire trucks. You're not going to go to fires or car accidents or anything. But I immediately kind of liked the firefighting aspect. A while later, maybe a year later, then two of the members who were getting their fire science degrees at a community college, they came to the Monday night meeting and they have this photocopied piece of paper about this fire protection engineering program at University of Maryland. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. What exactly does this mean and what is it? So I made a trip to University of Maryland that year. I was in 10th grade then. I met Dr. Brian Wright, who is one of the more famous folks from Oklahoma, and he talked about the program. And I think in 10th grade, I think I was 99% sure I wanted to figure out how I could go to University of Maryland to go through that program. So I was just blessed to kind of have all these things that kind of came together and that were kind of connected. I liked the firefighting part, but I always had in the back of my mind I wanted to be an engineer. My father was an engineer, and that's kind of how it all started for me when I was 15 years old. So, and been doing it ever since, which is a long time for my age. So.
That's awesome. That's interesting to hear. That seems like a common thread of involvement with the fire service and then a proclivity for math and science or a family member that is related to engineering. So that's good to hear. Well, so for a bit more of context, would you mind explaining a couple more of the roles that you've held during your career?
Sure. So the first kind of job I had in the fire protection engineering world, it was a summer intern job with the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was the Veterans Administration back then. But I had a summer internship in Washington, D.C. at the VA Central Office. And of course, the VA does hospitals and nursing homes. So I learned a lot about the NFPA life safety code and the fire safety evaluation system as a part of that summer job, working with the really smart FPEs that were there. The supervisor that headed up that group, Bill Brooks, one of the other things he did for me that summer is he arranged for me to go visit with fire protection engineers and other federal agencies, Army Corps of Engineers, Naval Sea Systems Command, NAVFAC, all these other federal agencies, Department of Transportation. And I got a chance to see what they did in this FPE role. So I really didn't realize at the time, how much I was to absorb from kind of having that opportunity to spend a couple hours with them. So that was kind of my first intern job. There go the allergies. Uh, and then that was between junior and senior years. And then I had kind of gravitated towards this idea of working for Naval Facilities Engineering Command, NAVFAC. That was my first job then after graduation in 1982. I was at the Southern Division down in Charleston, South Carolina. And I think what appealed to me about that is when you work on military projects, and you sounds like you're familiar with this, right? The military builds everything. And sometimes they only build one or two of those things ever in the history of building construction. So I had a 4 great years working at NAVFAC down in Charleston. Again, the supervisor of that was a gentleman named Dennis Davis. I worked with other great FPEs, Les Engels, Jim Crawford. And these were people that really helped morph me and guide me. And it's like I always said to people, in college, you get your degree and then you get your education when you get your first real job. So they really taught me kind of that connection between the theory and what maybe you learned in school, and then how that kind of applies to real world building design and construction. So I said I had 4 great years at NAVFAC, and I kind of learned that. I learned how to travel. I'd never been on an airplane until I was 21 years old, and all of a sudden I'm on an airplane every other week going to, somewhere on a project in Florida or Texas or New Mexico. But again, just a fascinating job. I really liked everything about that. Definitely.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that complexity piece of the DoD, and that's it's very alluring for multiple disciplines of engineer because of just the type of systems and the type of work. I think for engineers, I think it takes a different breed of architect when you get into a lot of military work. But for engineers, it seems if you like the detail and you like the complexity, that it's very compelling. So that's cool to hear about that origin story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it says I had that period, that time down at NAVFAC, and then in 1986, I knew there were some openings at NFPA, and I think I'd mentioned right when I was in the fire department back in Pennsylvania when I was 15 or 16. They had this set of these books, and I didn't know what they were. It was this NFPA thing, and I remember looking at them when I'm 16, like what on earth are these things, and what is this NFPA? And one of the things I didn't mention is I got a student membership in NFPA when I was 17. So then you learn about it, going through the program at University of Maryland. And it was always in the back of my mind, that sounds like a pretty interesting place to maybe work. So at 86, I knew there were some openings up there. And back then you had to write a letter, and I wrote the letter, and it's like, here's my resume. And they actually contacted me to come up for an interview. I thought, like, oh gosh, it was like, okay, Boston? I don't know anything about Boston. It's this big city. I'm not used to big cities. Came up, interview went well. I was offered a position, and so I left NAVFAC and went to work at NFPA back in July of 1986. And at the time, my goal was like, I want to work here for 4 or 5 years to learn about how these codes are developed and made. And then I figured I'd go do something else. I'd go work for a consultant, or maybe go back to some federal agency. But the opportunities that I got at NFPA were nonstop. It's like anything. Sometimes it falls in your lap. Sometimes you have to go looking for it. Sometimes you have to kind of create the opportunity. And 34 years later, it's like, oh, I've had a good run here. It's time for me to go to do something else. So my 5-year plan all of a sudden morphed into a 34-year plan. And like I said, it still is. It's a privilege to work at NFPA. It's a great organization. I I was never bored there. There was always something new around the corner, and the things I worked on, whether, I think what I enjoyed the most, obviously, is working directly with the technical committees. But I was involved in some of the, big fire investigation programs and report writing. Was always usually involved on, some national or international catastrophe, right? I was managing the group that usually would have involvement with that, whether it was the fire code or the building code or the life safety code aspect. but it was just like it was just an unbelievable experience the whole time I was there. I was working, some of the people your age. I don't know if you'll know names like Chet Shermer or the actual Rolf Jensen. These are the people that really, I think, really kind of put our profession on the map, put fire protection engineering on the map. And I would be sitting in meetings with these guys, and they'd be asking me my opinion. I'm like, I don't. I guess the word would be almost like starstruck initially. It's like you're asking me what I think, and so it was just like it was just an unbelievable experience the whole time I was there. But like I said, whether it was the new committee projects, the fire investigation work, the research work, it was all of those things just really it gave me opportunities I never thought in a million years I would have. So it was, to work somewhere for 34 years, that's pretty unusual now. But I think, I'm in the generation that was maybe a little bit more common than it is today. So my NFPA time was just, it was awesome is the only way I could describe it.
That's incredible. That sounds so cool, to be in that, era of just some of the imminent, forces now in the industry just, coming to fruition. That's really cool to hear about, and lots of good nuggets in there that I am sure we could spend a whole conversation on. But, one that strikes me as one I wanted to ask you about is, that fire investigations piece. I know that as fire and life safety professionals, a lot of what we do is based on, retroactively, looking at how things went wrong and trying to correct those in the code cycles. But how does that experience at NFPA kind of color your context for how you look at design? I know that's kind of a broad question, but I'd like to hear your answer on that.
Yeah, so I think there's two things that influence the way I look at application of codes to building design, and one is I was only the volunteer fire service for 7 years, in between Pennsylvania and then what I did down in Prince George's County, Maryland. So I kind of know what a fire feels like. That was part of it. And then when you're at some of these fire investigation scenes, like I said, I was at DuPont Plaza where 97 people died, and you're walking through these areas where the bodies were a couple of days prior, or at Meridian Plaza where we've got the 3 firefighter fatalities, and it's just like how on earth do we get to these places? So I think that those things kind of sear some you know memories or the way I'm going to approach things that you know and again in either one of those fires, right? The role of the NFPA investigation is not necessarily it's not necessarily focused on cause and origin, right? Someone else is going to determine that. The NFPA report is okay, regardless of how it started. What is it that allowed this fire event to get to the point it did it? And that's where the code piece comes in. So I think between my experience, even though it was short lived in the volunteer fire service, and then on the fire investigations to see the actual impacts, it's like look, there are no shortcuts in this business, right? Oftentimes, remember, we do have these things, or we do have these types of fires. There is a shortcut, or in other cases, it's simply the ongoing inspection, testing, and maintenance is not followed through, right? So it kind of falls on the building owner. So the codes can make that foolproof to an extent, but right, we still have the human element that can that kind of comes into play. And I think especially in the assembly occupancies, right, that's that tough area because you do have to rely on folks like crowd managers and even like some of the safety or usher staff to help you with that, because no matter what you put in the code, people are going to figure out a way to defeat it. We just had one came in on the weekend about the height of a guardrail and design of a guardrail at an assembly facility. And the inspector said, well, somebody could climb on that and climb on that. And it's like, of course they can, right? They can, people can always figure out how to climb over those things, right? So that's kind of where that human element comes in, and I think that's that's the other piece I try to look at, like the office building versus residential versus the assembly, and I keep those fairly compartmented. I think in terms of how I'm going to look at how to apply the life safety code or the IBC to those occupancies, and to make sure we have good explanations when somebody is questioning why they have to do it or how they have to do it. So that that all that stuff sits in the back here somewhere, and I can pull it out when I need it. So
Yeah, I think that is the difficult part and the mark of, somebody who can speak with confidence about a lot of fire and life safety is that nuance and the explaining of the justification, um, because like you're saying, you're going to get pushback in your career from a code official or somebody, and you need to understand that direction or why that piece of code is there and what is a reasonable bound for the kind of life safety that we're providing in the context of prescriptive code. So you have to have that understanding, or else you're going to get thrown for a loop. It's guaranteed.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
for sure, for sure. And I was just saying that when I left NFPA, and where I am now at SLS Consulting, that's part of my role there, right? We get a situation, and maybe we're doing a performance based design, or we're looking at a potential code equivalency, or we got somebody questioning, why does it have to be done that way? And probably 9 times out of 10, I can tell them why, because I guess it shows I'm old, but like I was probably there when the committee made the change, or I worked with that committee long enough that I knew the history of why that thing was in the code since 1930 or 1940 or whatever. So that's the other piece I think that I can bring, is there still is some importance to know the historical perspective about how the requirement got there. Is it based on a research report? Is it based on a fire? Is it based on some other tragic event or tragedy, or something else that went wrong? So those are that's one of the things I help my colleagues with now at SLS as well. So
yeah, and that's a great question. Something I had planned to ask you later in the interview, but this seems like a good interjection point. Is if and there might be no good answer to this other than you need just more experience and more time in the code cycles, but how does somebody who's trying to like absorb as much of this intent and subtext as possible, do you have any piece of advice for a young professional or somebody who's trying to gain expertise or proficiency in some piece of some code or standard, uh, w- uh, or do you have any tips for somebody in that kind of situation?
yes, I think that the two things I try to encourage people to do. I teach this one undergrad class out at WPI. It's only offered once a year, and it's what I tell the students this, maybe an old timers expression, but the class is an introduction to fire protection engineering, and it's that mile wide, inch deep, right? They get hit with everything from IBC, NFPA 101, sprinklers, standpipes, fire alarm systems, and they get that exposure. But one of the things I tell them, one is is wherever they end up working, is to make sure that they can identify a good mentor, right? And I think that the mentorship is something that organizations are paying more attention to, right? We pay attention to that at SLS with the new students, the new employees, the new graduates. NFPA, I think, did a very good job with that. So finding a good mentor is important to kind of shadow them, and and follow them, and to understand, right? I've been doing this for 40 plus years, and I still don't know everything, right? I learned stuff from the 25-year-olds I work with. So right, so that learning thing never stops. So one is to get a good mentor. I think in terms of if they can do it, and they can carve out the time, and they'll get support from their organization or from their company, is to look at the professional development programs offered by NFPA. Right, the NFPA programs give you a great introduction to those concepts, right? Like the life safety code seminar, or the sprinkler seminar, or the fire alarm seminar. Those are going to give you kind of the jumping off point, and then you kind of go to that that next level. Then you go look at the courses maybe that American Fire Sprinkler Association or National Fire Sprinkler Association, the courses they offer on sprinkler design, standpipe design, on fire pump design and understanding, on the inspection, testing, and maintenance protocols. And then you go to Automatic Fire Alarm Association, AFAA, for their courses on fire alarm design again, which really, those organizations now take you to that next level, to those deep dives. So those are kind of the roots. I think those are some places I would point folks to that are just getting involved in the business.
Yeah, that's a great point. Finding a mentor, finding a community, and then, understanding your code and standard base with NFPA and some of those online educational courses. I've taken a couple of those. I definitely super recommend I took several for 13 and 72. They were really, really high quality. I've never seen a course like that in the industry that even comes close. And then yeah, drilling down to the technology specific AFAA and NFSA and AFSA, if you need more explicit criteria. And they have books, they have technical guides and things. So that's great tips, Robert. I appreciate that. um, Wanted to kind of go back to that design experience you mentioned a little bit, and it could be at your role now for SLS or during your time at NFPA. But what is an example of a project that you're involved in that you're proud of, or that kind of gives listeners an idea of occupancy wise or technology wise, something that has been a focus for you?
The one that still stands out for me personally, when I was at NFPA, this is the change that came into the Life Safety Code in the 2012 edition around this notion of what's referred to as culture change. And I remember in early 2008, I headed up the NFPA Building and Life Safety Group for a long time. And I was contacted by this organization called the Pioneer Network. And they said, "Oh, we're having this conference in April, and we're looking for somebody to come to speak about this NFPA Life Safety Code that all of the hospitals and nursing homes are required to comply with because of the federal regulations." So I'm like, "Oh yeah, I can do that." And he said, it was in D.C., and I said, "I'll bring the Washington D.C. rep. I'll co-present with her." And I said, "Can you send me information a little bit more about what you're looking for and what your organization is doing?" And I get like this white paper, and I'm looking at it. I'm going like, I'm reading. What you want to put community kitchens in a nursing home? You want to put fireplaces in a nursing home? They have all this stuff, and it was this group that had been working on this for 10 years, and what was stopping them was the life safety code. So my initial reaction is like, this is like crazy. What do you mean? This makes absolutely no sense. So I got through the white paper. Then a couple months later, we're at it was like a 3-day conference, I think, in DC, and I'm talking to all these advocates for this, and these people were super passionate. And by the time I left that conference, I'm thinking like, we have to figure out how we can change the life safety code to allow these things to happen. I kind of look back, some of there were one or two nursing home fires I had peripheral involvement in. And, in the US, we used to design nursing homes almost slightly better than we design a prison, right? Double loaded corridors with concrete block walls. And, you know, it's just like a dull, drab place for people to, spend their last months or years or whatever living. So this whole culture change initiative was to make this more into a home-like environment. And if you're going to call it a nursing home, then you need to figure out how to, how to make that design fit a little bit better. So the other part of me thought, boy, in 30 or 40 years, if I open a nursing home, I want to be in one of these like really cool looking, nice, comfortable places rather than what I envisioned nursing homes typically being. So we had worked with the Pioneer Network, and then we worked with a benefactor from the Rothschild Foundation, and those two organizations took the lead. They put some research money into NFPA and the Research Foundation to help us co-sponsor. We did 2 healthcare summits around this concept, around this notion to introduce it. There was buy-in immediately from the Technical Committee on Healthcare Occupancies and the Life Safety Code, and everybody went to work probably late 2008, 2000, early 2009 to get those changes in the 2012 code. And that is one of the main reasons that CMS moved to adopt the 2012 code kind of as quickly as they did. It still takes time, but as quickly as they did because the code now introduced these culture change initiatives. So when I look back on things I did at NFPA, that one, I think that one was interesting because one, it opened my mind to look at things differently, to look at the nursing home environment differently. It's a positive change for society. And I think it's one of those code changes. It wasn't done because of a tragedy or a fire. It was a proactive thing. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen NFPA and I've seen ICC, I think doing more changes like that, being more proactive to make adjustments to what society wants rather than, oh, now we had this fire, we had this earthquake, we have to go make a change, right? So I think the code organizations are much better. And that for me is, I think, the one thing at NFPA that I think I'm still most proud of. And I was just glad to see how that all worked out, and now, this is a standard design. No one questions about the community kitchen in the nursing home or the fireplace or the more bright open areas. So that's the one that sticks with me the most, I think, of everything I've done.
That's awesome. Cool to see the fire and life safety dovetail with improving life quality for people and making positive change. And I think that is a big part of the reason why a lot of people love fire and life safety is their the social implications of it and the protections and making a difference in your community. So that's really cool to hear about that, Robert.
Yeah, yeah. And I was just saying now, at SLS, we have, one of the things that we're starting to get asked about, are some of these alternative materials around sustainability and, net zero energy, right? So we have the obviously the mass timber stuff that groups like ICC and the Fire Protection Research Foundation did all that work, all that effort over about a 4-year period to get those changes in the 2021 edition of the IBC. Um, that's partly being pushed by sustainability initiatives, but now we also have like other materials coming on the market. And one of the things that we look at SLS is we have a project right now where it's an alternative material that has very friendly environmental properties. It has a low carbon footprint, but it's not, when I pick up the book right now, it's not in the book. So we're figuring out, what are the steps, what's the pathway to get it in the book, or maybe to at least get it approved under some alternative means and methods initially, and then and kind of see where it goes from there. So that's another role that's unique for FPEs, that people are coming up with new ideas, new technologies, new concepts, right? The whole energy storage system is another one of those. That do we need it? Yes. Can we do it safely? Yes. Does it always go perfectly? No. But it's like all this, right? The the battery manufacturers are trying to figure out, what are the alternatives to lithium ion batteries? What's a safer type battery that gives you the same efficiencies and the same outputs? So it's this never ending swirl of advancements in technology, which is, which I like, right? It's exciting. It keeps you engaged, and it keeps me interested in the business. So
Yeah, definitely. It always makes it interesting. That's one of the most alluring parts about the industry is the variety. The variety is the spice of life, and fire and life safety has no end to the variety and complexity that you can dive into. And yeah, that's definitely from like a schooling. While I was in school, I had no clue that there were fire protection engineers that specified in products and how to get a specific product FM approved or UL listed, or what that process looked like going through the different testing agencies and the significant time and cost associated with that process, and how if you don't have somebody who knows what they're doing, that it's just basically a black box and it's like hard to crack that code. And so I mean, I think it's really interesting as a way to do work. But yeah, that's a very cool process. And another great topic you pressed on was lithium ion batteries. And man, what a hot topic in the industry right now. People trying to figure out how to protect them. They're everywhere. So, what does that look like? Separation of battery arrays, different protection technologies. That's a great topic.
yeah, it is, and I think that's one. I think we brought some attention on that at NFPA back in 2014. It was ironically it was a guy at my church, and he lived in Massachusetts, but he was working with this company out in Seattle, Washington. He would travel out there almost every week, and having like coffee time after church. He's talking about this battery thing. I'm like, what is this? So after about 6 months, I said, can you come in and do a lunch and learn for our technical staff on this? So I had Brad come in, and he told us about it. And like I said, that was 2014. And we were just starting to hear a little bit more about this. And then all of a sudden, he's explaining like what the uses are. And this is really before the, technology really started to ramp up. So as far back as 2014, I say it was like, I wouldn't have known anything about ESS until a couple of years later, had I not, had this conversation with, one of my fellow church members. So it's weird how some of these things kind of transpire. But that got NFPA looking more closely at it, some research work, and then creation of NFPA 855, and everybody's paralleling with the requirements in NFPA 1 and the IFC, and trying to figure out how all those pieces fit. And something you hit on, right? It's that um, it's that dance, right, between, well, here's what the code does, well, here's what the standard does, well, here's what the UL or FM product standard does for the testing. And it is, those pieces just don't happen. There's a lot of careful coordination and cooperation between those organizations to make sure everybody gets the right test protocols and procedures, so we can end up with good documents like NFPA 855, or the requirements end up in the fire codes or the building codes. Or I heard last week, I haven't verified it yet. There's something apparently in the Massachusetts stretch energy code provision that I think it takes effect July 1st. Someone told me that they thought they heard there's something in there about mandatory use of ESS in certain types of buildings if the local jurisdiction adopts the stretch code. So I have to do some homework on that to verify that. But yeah, you're right. It's the stuff is everywhere, and there's no end in sight.
Yeah, another good point of that emphasizes your statement of it's everywhere is sustainability, which you mentioned, and how that is getting ever increasing focus in fire and life safety, which is pushing people to, you know, consider solar arrays and battery storage for the UPS for those solar arrays, and so they kind of just feeds off of itself in this push forward. And so it's interesting to one of the issues I wanted to focus on, because I've seen it as a through line in your career, is emerging technologies and kind of how do we look at them and address them as these things pop up, or as technologies die, like we've seen recently with some of the foam products out there, and the legislation kind of removing those technologies from the conversation or modifying them and having new products in their place. But yeah, I think that's a great topic. I'd love to hear from you about how you see a framework for taking a look at how these things change.
Yeah, so I think those are other examples I think of changes driven by society. So my first exposure to that is whenever the US EPA and other their counterparts in other countries started the phase out of the halon CFC gases back in the 1980s. So one of my former colleagues at NFPA, Casey Grant, he was very much in the middle of that in his role at NFPA, and that was kind of like, here's this Halon 1301. When I worked at NAVFAC, anything that was data or tracking or telemetry or communications, there was a Halon 1301 system in it. I should know, but right, but I'd be in those rooms when we would do the discharge tests, right? So, and I think back then, like, it was, you didn't even think twice about it. So now all of a sudden there's this movement to get rid of it back in, like I said, I think that started in 1985, 1986 maybe. But in 1989, that's kind of whenever, I think that was here, the Montreal Protocol, and like all the signatories said, we're going to ban it by, whatever date. So now all of a sudden, everybody, like you said, everybody's scrambling. We have this great agent. It's very effective. It doesn't leave any residue. It doesn't leave a mess, but it destroys the ozone layer. So I went on a trip to China with some other NFPA folks and UL folks to talk to their government agencies about alternatives to halon, right? So we're talking about that before the replacement chemicals are there. So we're talking about these early concepts, not early, like automatic sprinkler systems, but early concepts like water mist. So shortly after that trip, then NFPA starts down the road to develop NFPA 750. Water mist is maybe an alternative agent, but then the other producers were looking at alternative clean agent gas extinguishing features or characteristics. That then was my foray into this, like, oh boy, there's other stuff we have to consider. Of course, we're going to put the fire out, but we also have to look at other implications. You look at energy efficiency. So, now we're putting different materials on the facades of the buildings to manage, more efficient cooling in the summer months and more efficient heating in the winter months. And oh yeah, by the way, there's an inch or 2 inches of some kind of poly material sandwiched between the panels. So you see, like, okay, that's a societal response for energy stuff, and then how do we safely get that material? And then you see initial development of the old standard, the old Uniform Building Code standard on this that morphed into NFPA 285. So there's another example of where those pieces really connect. And I think now when you look at sustainability, I think a lot of the focus is really going to be on the materials, right? The big dog right now, it was the creation of the mass timber requirements in the code that allow us to go to, I think, 18 stories now for certain occupancies. If you told me 10 years ago we'd have code provisions that allowed wood for 10 stories, I would have said, yeah, no way, next. But it's that whole thing. It's like, okay, right, your initial FPE reaction is like, it's wood, it burns, it's bad. And it's like, oh, it's wood, it's heavy timber. Can it burn? Yes, but it has unique characteristics like the charring to create the insulation. And again, I look back my volunteer fire department days. Like I said, very rural area. I remember going to barn fires and the siding would be gone, but those big, 10 by 10 beams would just smolder for days and they were still structurally sound. So that was like my connection to like, oh yeah, that stuff really is pretty durable when it comes to fire. So it's things like that. But my personal opinion, as I started to say, my personal opinion is it's going to really now be on the materials. Um, if I have, I guess the literature I read, right, to produce concrete, it's very high intensity and it's it's a CO2 issue and things like that, or production of steel, or the supply chain. Like I can make the steel, but now am I bringing the steel from a foreign country? Well, how much energy does that take, and how does that affect supply chain? So I think a lot of effort's going to really be on alternative materials for building construction. You mentioned the PFAS issue with AFFF, right? Same thing. We have that in pretty much every Type 1 aircraft hangar in the U.S., whether it's military or civilian or commercial hangar. But that's where American technology and effort comes in. The manufacturers of the AFFF see like, oh yeah, this I see where this is going. My product won't be able to be sold after some period of time, or states are going to regulate it out of use. I better come up with an alternative. So it puts that onus or burden back on those manufacturers to come up with the next thing, and they did, right? They came up with the fluorine free foam. So the there's always a way to figure it out. Is what I've learned, if anything, over 40 years in this business. So
Oh yeah, definitely. It's remarkable how fast that they've spun up those new foam solutions. With even though they're remarkably different with their viscosities and how much they had to alter their inductors and all the associated equipment, and still, it's like we have listed products coming out for those things. So it's pretty remarkable how just it changes and people figure it out.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, a micro version of that. It wasn't so much the environmental thing, but if you recall, and I got to say, like a couple years ago, it's probably at least 15 years ago now, maybe 12 years. Whenever we had the ban on antifreeze and sprinkler systems, right? Right. And NFPA took a very hard stance on that, and the committee kind of put use of antifreeze on the back shelf, like you can't use it because of a couple of events that the association was made aware of. So what happened? The manufacturers figure out how to make an antifreeze that's not combustible, even in 100% concentrated form. But so there's a case where the antifreeze actually made the fire potentially worse. And that's then, hey, the fire sprinkler system's purpose is to make the fire go away, not to enhance it. But there's another one of those circumstances where where the manufacturers figured out a way to come up with a non-combustible antifreeze concentrate.
Yeah, I think that's a great example because at the early part of my career, I was working for a suppression contractor, and we were ripping those systems out of places. And then now I'm designing systems, small systems for uh, you know uh, spaces like little garages or attic spaces that those systems fit perfectly. And now I'm getting to install those systems. So that's a great point on how technology and manufacturing can find a way, and that innovation piece is pretty cool. So I saw that recently that you were a part of a section in the NFPA handbook about smart technologies and how that impacts or affects fire and life safety. I'd love to hear about that if you wouldn't mind speaking about it.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, that's a new chapter in the new edition of the handbook, the 21st edition of the handbook that came out recently. So my collaborator in that is a gentleman named Ken Boyce from Underwriters Laboratories, UL, and I met Ken over the years at the UL Fire Council meetings when I was on the council, and then one of my last presentations at NFPA was in November of 1919 of 2019, where the Research Foundation ran a 2-day symposium on kind of electrical data needs. And I presented kind of looking at that from the perspective of ISO, the International Standards Organization. My last 3 or 4 years at NFPA, I chaired the U.S. TAG for an ISO committee, ISO TC 268, which dealt with smart and sustainable communities. So a lot of what that had to deal with, it had to deal with kind of the measures that, jurisdictions, whether it's a city, a county, a state, it could be the whole country, or subdivision, a township or a town, whatever, some of the measures they could do to look at their sustainability kind of provisions. And, one of the things that our committees had worked on, we looked at some of the metrics about what you would measure, but we also looked at the ways that you would measure it. And that involved extensive use of smart technologies, right? Sensors, whether it's a camera or it's something embedded in the sidewalk or embedded in the street to look at pedestrian traffic, vehicle traffic, to collect data about bus routes, about garbage collection times, right? So that was kind of the piece I talked about at that event, and Ken was presented on some of that from the UL perspective. So we were asked to kind of put something together around smart technologies. I think the initial idea was to focus it on smart firefighting, and there's a whole Fire Protection Research Foundation report on that, which is awesome. But we said, look, this isn't just smart firefighting, right? This is something that affects, in my opinion, every aspect of the built environment, right? So everything from the time the developer says, I want to build a whatever, right? And then they might have a small internal design team. As soon as that design team starts firing up their Revit model, right? All of a sudden now I have like that first piece of smart technology. I've got something that's going to get translated to the other consultants. It's probably going to get translated as part of the as-built drawings for the building. And then those things are going to start to connect to maybe, elevator. Here's all my elevator specs over here. Here's the manufacturer's criteria for the actual elevators that I have installed. So all of a sudden you have this ecosystem that is connected from obviously the design stage all the way through building life cycle. So I think our chapter kind of worked to connect those pieces together, kind of how it all works. Everything that we do now, there's some aspect, right? I mean, you and I are using smart technology today, even though we're using computers or cameras or whatever, right? Those kind of fit into that because we're connected to the internet somewhere, and I think that's really any device or component that kind of can get online like that and go to the cloud somewhere, that kind of falls into this broad category of smart technology. So we kind of laid out the basics of that and talked about like where this appears. I mean, it appears in tractors and combines. It appears in the medical community and the medical devices. It appears in traffic lights and traffic signals. So it's everywhere. It's around us. I don't think it's going away. I think if anything, right, there's going to be more of it. So we tried to set that broad landscape about all the places that smart technology shows up and appears. And some people say, well, my privacy, my privacy, my privacy. I think the days of privacy are. I don't say that they're gone, but like we all have to decide if we're going to carry a smartphone. And if we carry a smartphone, we're going to lose some of that privacy. We can control maybe what app is tracking us, but we have to make those decisions. So what we try to do is lay out that broad landscape, and then kind of bring it back to, okay, when we look at the built environment and codes and standards, what are some places that this is working in right now? And you look in NFPA 25 and NFPA 20, for example, you see some things that we now can monitor remotely. We'll let that count towards your NFPA 25 ITM inspection, or maybe a weekly test, instead of having a person to physically go there, open the door, and watch the pump run for 20 minutes and then go back, right? So there are ways that we can improve those efficiencies, but there's also the performance criteria the standards had to add in, right? In NFPA 25 and 13 and NFPA 20 as examples, and those are the three I think we talk about the most, within the new chapter. So that was the purpose of that. I hope we achieve that. There's so much you could write, and what's interesting is what people don't realize, those handbooks take a long time to produce, and NFPA did an awesome job with it. But that content, it's content that Ken and I wrote probably back in, most of it, January, February of 2021. And you look at how many things have changed since then, right?
Wow.
In those 2 years, right? So we had a chance to add a few more things a little bit later in the year, but there's a point where, okay, it's going into production. You can only make editorial changes. You can't add the new substance. But like I said, that whole area of smart systems, there's something new. It seems like almost every day that you learn about or read about, or kind of the next thing that's around the corner. So
Yeah, yeah, it's so ubiquitous that you get into. We do a lot of military work, and they don't want smart devices in there because it's a cybersecurity threat, and it's like trying to find a pump or something, a domestic water pump or something that's not already have Bluetooth capabilities. It's like they're having to scramble to find something in the range of the manufacturers they're used to that's not smart capable or disabled in some way. So it's fascinating how ubiquitous it is. But well, Robert, I want to be mindful of your time, and I've really enjoyed the conversation and lots of great topics. And we didn't get to all the questions I had for you, but I just really appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and thanks for coming on the show.
all right. Well, again, thank you very much. And I said it's great for me to see young folks like you, getting in this business. And that was one of your questions, right? We need more. And I think if I've got a minute here, one
Sure.
of the questions I want to make sure we hit on, he said, what are the other things to attract more people? And I think I think SFPE is doing a great job. I think the individual universities do a great job of that outreach. One of the things that I see is a potentially untapped group of engineers. It's the 24 schools that have architectural engineering programs. And I know there's one at WPI. That's where most of my students come in to my class from. There's one at Oklahoma State, for example. But I think architectural engineers are kind of like FPEs, because like they're learning a little bit about every building system and feature,
Mm,
and they already have a pretty good background on understanding electrical systems and how the architect works and the structural piece, and the plumbing pieces. So I think that's maybe an untapped group that we all could be looking at to maybe go talk to the architectural engineering students at these handful of schools that offer those programs, to get them interested, and then have them come to work, and then part time go get your master's at Cal Poly or Maryland or WPI, or I don't even know who all has them now in the U.S. But those are some things to I think that's a good place to look for new folks.
that's a great point. I appreciate you touching on that because I see just nonstop on LinkedIn job posting, job posting, job posting. People are looking for new hires, and I think that as an industry, we have to be better at outreach, going to ASHRAE and going to these other professional societies, going and speaking with other college degree plans. Like, the architectural engineering and putting the thought of fire protection and the promise of what a great field it is in those young minds. So I appreciate that point. We got to get creative and get the word out about how great this profession is. So that's a great point to end on.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you very much, and best of luck with the podcast and your other full time job. So it sounds like you've hit a good niche here as well. So
Yeah.
enjoy.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.